This is Kick-Ass News. I'm Ben Mathis. Beginning on Sunday, March 29th at 8 p.m. Eastern and Pacific, the acclaimed news documentary series Vice moves from HBO to Showtime. Since its debut in 2013, Vice has delivered crucial in-depth journalism from the front lines of global conflict, including civil uprisings in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and beyond, and has provided perspective on some of the world's most pressing issues, from LGBTQ rights and the climate crisis to immigration and gun control. Now, the new 13-episode season of Vice will tackle new and complex geopolitical stories from all corners of the globe, including a report from Isobel Yeung on the growing human rights crisis in India, where the government has directed the building of detention camps for targeted Muslims. And today I'm happy to welcome Isobel back to the podcast, along with Vice Media's president of Global News and Entertainment, Jesse Angelo. Isobel talks about her groundbreaking coverage of the Syrian civil war and China's forced detention of Uighur Muslims. She shares what it's like doing serious journalism in authoritarian countries where media is tightly controlled, and Jesse discusses the complicated process of keeping his reporters safe in those countries. Jesse also talks about his adjustment to Vice, coming from Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, where he oversaw the New York Post, the recent move of Vice's flagship program from HBO to Showtime, and why Vice will continue to focus on underreported stories beyond our borders while the rest of the media obsess over the election in 2020. Coming up with Vice's Jesse Angelo and Isobel Yeung in just a moment. I'm sitting down with Jesse Angelo and Isobel Yeung of Vice. Jesse Angelo joined Vice Media as president of Global News and Entertainment in June 2019, where, among other things, he's overseeing the revamp of their cable network Viceland and the move of their flagship program from HBO to Showtime. Isobel Yeung is an Emmy-winning correspondent for Vice. Yeung has reported from nearly every war zone throughout her deployments for Vice News, documenting conflicts and crises in Yemen, Syria, Libya, Iraq, Turkey, the Philippines, and Afghanistan. The new 13-episode season of Vice premieres this spring on Showtime and will continue to shed light on a range of international issues through its exclusive reportage from the front lines of global conflicts, civil uprisings, and beyond. Jesse, welcome, and Isobel, welcome back.
Thanks, Ben. Nice to see you.
Yeah. Now, Isobel, last time we spoke, I want to say it was around season 5, when you were doing some heartbreaking reporting from Syria. What do you think when you look back on that whole era and compare it with Syria today, where just about any semblance of an uprising has been thoroughly quashed and the world community just doesn't seem to have much of an appetite for Assad's ouster anymore?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly heartbreaking to think about what's happened and how this has dragged on. I mean, even in the last year or so, the last few months or so, we've seen how things have escalated, and what is an incredibly fragile situation, and the grievances that people had even before the civil war broke out have only escalated, and things are in real turmoil.
Well, yeah, and then on a lighter note, I suppose, I do sort of remember that you had an interesting moment where I guess you went on a state-sponsored morning show in Syria on the Assad-controlled network, which was, it was weird. It was like, you know, a little propaganda with your morning coffee. And I remember you and the host just seemed to be talking on two different levels and two entirely different subjects. It was the weirdest thing.
Yeah, that's the world's most awkward live TV moment.
Yeah.
Where he just was not answering any of my questions. I did not want to answer any of their questions, and it was just a real battlehead. And on live TV, this producer was in my ear telling me to shut up and answer the questions.
Now, given that many times you're going to places where media is very tightly controlled, do those kind of situations after a while start to become less and less surreal and just par for the course for you?
There's definitely a lot of very surreal, strange situations you find yourself in as a foreign correspondent. I don't know if they get part of the course. I mean, I think what's exciting about this job is I feel incredibly privileged to be able to go to these places and tell in-depth stories, immersive stories, very raw stories, and to be able to meet people in some of the most vulnerable situations and circumstances in the world. And that's not something I take lightly. And I think that using that responsibility is incredibly important. And so I don't think that they become part of the course. I think that, you get more used to handling those kind of situations and knowing how to take them on board.
I'm assuming that when you're in a place like Syria or Afghanistan, you have a lot of handlers around you that are kind of sanctioned by the government and trying to steer you to certain stories, certain subjects, and so forth. How do you go about dodging them and getting to the story that you really want to tell?
Yeah, that can sometimes be a challenge. I mean, it depends in what circumstances you go in under. So often, as you said, we're going in with government forces or we're going in under government duress. And so, kind of managing the minders becomes sort of a full-time job between me and my crew. Other times we're going in under the control of militias or certain military factions. And so our security is kind of in their hands often. Yeah. And so then it becomes a case of kind of managing their expectations and being able to talk to people and tell the stories that we want to do. So it's a constant kind of dance around that stuff.
And Jesse, as the guy who's charged with keeping them safe, how do you go about that? I mean, Vice is a pretty big operation, but it's not CNN where you have, a bureau in every country and these long established ties with security operations there.
Well, I think, first of all, we have a remarkable security team, which truly is tops in the industry. They've actually now, other news organizations and others have been coming to us asking sort of for training and help in how we do security assessments and how we train our people. So we take it very, very seriously, obviously. But that doesn't mean it's not nerve-wracking. And look, we're always going to be led by our correspondents and our producers. At the outset, most of the time, these are stories that they are pitching. They're coming to us and saying, I want to go here because here's a story we need to be telling. So it starts with their passion for wanting to get that story. That makes you as an executive say, well, geez, my job is to figure out, well, how can we do that? How can we do that safely? How can we get that story on the air? How can we deal with whatever legal issues there may be? Sort of how do we make sure that the kindling of a story idea and the passion that our correspondents and producers bring to their job, my job is just to shepherd that along and make sure it gets to where it needs to get to safely. But look, I think the first time when Isobel and I encountered this, she was on the ground in Idlib in Syria a few weeks before al-Baghdadi was killed, and this is a trip they had wanted to take for a long time and had been working for a number of years to get the right access. And when they said, well, we've got it, we're going to go, and we knew it was scary, and I was, I had a slightly sleepless night, and Isobel, of course, Isobel, of course, was totally fine.
You and my mom.
I mean, Isobel was fine. She jetted off and slept on a cot in a tent somewhere and shook it off like no drama. But I was back home going, gosh, I hope they got home safe. But of course they did. But look, I think all journalists, you trust your gut and you trust your intuition when you're on the ground, and we always have obviously contingency plans and ways to get out, and knock on wood, our teams, they've been in some close scrapes, but everything's gone fine so far.
Now, Jesse, you're sort of the new guy at Vice. You came over in June 2019 after serving as chief of digital advertising solutions at News Corp, as well as publisher and CEO of the New York Post, where you worked pretty much, I think, your whole career, 20 years or something like that. What was that transition like for you from a more established dead trees newspaper type of model to a digital and cable news company with a much younger audience?
It was a fascinating and electrifying experience, and I've been enjoying every minute of it. Yeah. Vice is a remarkable company. We operate in 25 countries and 35 languages. It is a place that is full of young people, people that are extraordinarily passionate and creative about the work they do, both our journalism, our digital teams, everybody who, we do so many different kinds of things at Vice. And so to feel that electricity, you feel it as soon as you walk in the building, and that's really exciting. And it is a company that has a remarkable corporate cadence. It moves very, very fast, which is refreshing and fun. Difficult to keep up with sometimes, but in all the right ways. And one of the things that brought me to the company, our CEO Nancy Dubuque, who's a remarkable executive, and from the get-go, when I started talking to her, she wanted to double down on news, and she wanted to put Vice News and the incredible work that Isobel and the rest of the correspondents and the producers and teams have done really at the center of the future of this company, and really wanted to grow what we do to lots of different platforms, lots of different products, lots of different geographies. And when I saw how serious she was about that, and how much the ambition that she had for what this team could do, I knew it was sort of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I jumped at it.
What's been the steepest learning curve for you at Vice?
The steepest learning curve for me, I am very well versed in digital media. Obviously very well versed in journalism overall. I am not a documentary filmmaker. That's not my background. So learning and being around people who have spent their life perfecting that craft and trying to learn by osmosis about what that takes and what that process looks like, the amount of work in the edit suites and post-production to bring to the screen the things that we do, which are cinematic in scope. I mean, the level of production, that quality that we bring to the table, and we take that very seriously, and we want to make basically small movies about everything that we're doing. So understanding the ins and outs of that has been a real learning curve, and just exciting for me to learn that. And then again, I think I would always say that as an executive, you learn the same lessons over and over again. And for me, I think the enthusiasm and the optimism and how you sort of show up at the office every day, and how you talk to people, and how you think about launching new products. That always has a huge impact on the people around you, and frankly on the creative process itself.
And I have to think that they're two very different cultures too, coming from News Corp and the New York Post to Vice. I mean, what has that been like?
Jesse started wearing trainers to work. Most of my three-piece suits are now in the back of the closet, only coming out on occasion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you become a Brooklyn hipster yet?
I'm nowhere near that cool.
Okay.
I wouldn't even pretend to be. No, I'm the old man at the office. It's sort of depressing to realize you've reached that stage of your career, but so be it. No, look, I think the having an attitude around approaching the news differently, and always wanting to take a different angle, and always trying to look around a corner where other people aren't looking. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is a little bit of a through line there in terms of the journalism, but they're very different companies for sure. But it's been an adventure. I'm having a ball.
Yeah. Now, that culture has undergone a major change in recent years. Vice faced criticism for their hyper-masculine, quote-unquote, bro culture, which in 2017 culminated in the firing of 3 high-level employees who were faced with sexual harassment allegations. Now Vice has a female CEO, as you mentioned, and I want to say that I've heard that Vice employs more than 50% women. Isobel, does it feel like a vastly different place these days?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's any secret that we've had this old boys culture for a while at Vice. I've experienced some of that myself when I first got to Vice. And we got called out pretty hard. And as a result of that, we've seen pretty impressive changes, I would say, at the company. I don't think it's perfect, but, having spoken to many people, many of my friends who work in various corporate environments, at various different media organizations, I don't think that any environment is perfect. Mm-hmm. And I would say that Vice have made real efforts towards striving towards gender equality, gender pay equality, et cetera, and I have seen those changes take place over my career time there at Vice.
Yeah, look, I think it is a company that is now about 60% women globally, if you look at our entire workforce. And I give the company, and again, this started well before I got there, but especially in comparison to some of the other corporations out there.
Right. Vice, and you came from from News Corp, which had its own problems.
Well, those problems were actually at Fox and two separate companies.
Right. I'm curious, did you see any of that, or did you have much interaction with Ailes? Because you were kind of walled off in this whole separate operation.
Right. I mean, Fox and News Corp were separate companies. I mean, I would see Roger now and then, but no, I didn't have anything, really, any daily interaction with him at all. So for Vice, I think they really tackled these issues head on and did so in a very forthright and honest manner, and I give them enormous credit for having done that. If you look at our newsroom, all of my direct reports in the newsroom are women. There is no other news organization on earth, I think, that has as many women in senior decision-making roles within the newsroom and across the entire company as Vice. I can say that with if you look at everything else out there, I think we do pretty darn well.
Yeah, and women's rights has been a frequent focus of your reporting, Isobel, from women's rights in Afghanistan to female incarceration here in the U.S. Do you expect that some women's rights issues will be part of the new season of Vice coming up?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's incredibly important. Women's rights are human rights, and that will continue to be an incredibly important area and genre that I report on across the world.
Curious, have you guys figured out what you're going to be covering this year yet?
Some of it, yeah. The reason we're being a little bit cautious is, I don't know how much we're able to say and how much we're not, because we don't want people to steal our stories. But there's women's rights and women's roles in power and in the world will definitely play a part in my reporting this year.
And it's interesting what you just said about not wanting anyone to steal your stories, because you do tend to be a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of tackling issues that no one's paying attention to yet a lot of times. Particularly, I think that brings to mind, Isobel, your coverage of the Uighur Muslim population in China and how they've been treated by that government. You say that was one of the most harrowing assignments of your life. What was the scariest part about that?
It's the Chinese government have done an incredibly good job at ensuring that reports are not effectively coming out of that region. And so when reporters go there, they're followed very closely. They're made sure that they can't speak freely or report freely to locals, or they're taken on a essentially dog and pony show around certain camps and shown specific things that the Chinese government wants you to see. So it's incredibly tightly controlled. So we went in undercover as tourists and we filmed with hidden cameras. And it was a terrifying experience because this is the strictest surveillance state in the world right now. You're seeing security cameras everywhere. You're seeing facial recognition cameras. Your phones are being checked everywhere you go. There's so many thousands and thousands of security people everywhere. It's a really intense Orwellian atmosphere to be in, and it's it makes me shudder to think of it now, actually. And I know that you've spent a lot of time in China. I know that you kind of started your career working in Shanghai, and I'm assuming by your last name that you're of Chinese descent. When you're going to a place like China, do they treat you differently than they might treat a white American reporter? Do you encounter situations where the authorities maybe assume that you kind of fit within their authoritarian structure and they can bully you a little bit more? In certain ways. I mean, I think I was mistaken for being a Uyghur a lot of the time because I actually look kind of Central Asian.
Wow.
And a lot of people there are sort of mixed, which is what I am as well. So, when I went to that region 12 years ago, that really played to my advantage because it just meant that I could get around much easier. Now that this mass persecution of this one Muslim minority has taken place, it means you're stopped everywhere you go. Your ID is checked, you're questioned, you're brought into various corners and, really grilled by security forces. So it doesn't necessarily benefit you. But then on other times, it felt like you could sort of, in certain places, mix in a little bit better. You're not picked up as much as, Jesse walking around in Xinjiang would definitely get
might stand out a bit.
Pretty quickly noticed.
Now, given your British and Chinese background and the fact that you spent so much time in Shanghai, what do you make of the protests in Hong Kong? I don't recall if you've actually covered that yet, but how do you see that standoff between the protesters and authorities playing out?
Yeah, I was in Hong Kong a couple of months ago reporting on the protests. It's been really incredible to see the scale of these protests playing out and the fact that they're not really giving up. And, I've spoken to so many young Hong Kong people and older Hong Kong people actually, who are really united in this. Just recently, the results of the Taiwanese election was cause for Hong Kong people to be celebrating. And I can see them picking up again this year. It does not seem like something. It's a cause that people are really literally willing to die for. And so it's going to be incredibly interesting to see how China responds to that.
And I think I mentioned that your first job as a reporter was working for a state-run media outlet in Shanghai.
You don't have to mention that.
but you quickly, I guess, left and became a freelancer. What was it like going from that to a company like Vice?
If there's one way to figure out what it is you don't want to do in life, it's working for Chinese state TV. It's a very good lesson in everything that is not important to me. Transitioning to a freelancer and then working for Vice, you just feel such an incredible sense of freedom to be able to report on the issues that are important, to be able to push through stories. It's really liberating.
We're going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back with more when we come back in just a minute. Folks, these are difficult times for all of us. With the coronavirus and its devastating economic impact, many Americans are finding it harder than ever to make ends meet and quickly going through whatever rainy day funds they might have saved up. So ask yourself, what would you do if your laptop crashed? How are you going to work from home without your computer? Or what if you suddenly needed essential plumbing or electrical work? Goodness knows having the whole family working and living at home is putting a lot more wear and tear on your house right now. And you can't just go without power or water, so what would you do? If staying on top of your budget and protecting your home are goals for this year, take a look at American Home Shield. They give you a plan when stuff breaks down in your home. What kind of stuff? Refrigerators, ovens, heating and air conditioning, plumbing, electrical systems. Stuff insurance doesn't cover, and stuff you don't want to mess with or go broke trying to get fixed. If they can't repair the covered item, they'll replace it or offer an alternative solution. American Home Shield founded the home warranty industry almost 50 years ago, and as the nation's largest provider, they've paid more in home warranty claims than any other company, including $2 billion in claims over the past 5 years. There's also a nationwide network of more than 15,000 licensed professional contractors, so they can find the right pro in your area to fix your problem. Coverage is available no matter how old your systems and appliances are, with plans and pricing to fit every budget. In these uncertain times, do yourself and your family a favor and buy yourself a little peace of mind. Go to ahs.com/kick today to save $50 and start protecting your home and budget from inevitable breakdowns. ahs.com/kick. That's ahs.com/kick for $50 off any plan. American Home Shield. Be sure with Shield. Limitations and exclusions apply. See plan for details. Now, I mentioned that Vice's flagship news program is moving from HBO to Showtime this year. Jesse, what do you guys like about Showtime as a fit for the show?
They're fearless. And that's when I think about Vice News, that's always the word that comes to mind, fearless. Showtime has shown that they want to push the envelope in the stories that they tell, and that's how we as a news organization think as well. And Vinny Malhotra, who's the executive at Showtime that we've been working with, is a longtime news guy. He's been in the news business for a long time, and it was amazing when he walked into our newsroom and started talking to our producers and correspondents. It was just instantaneous. I mean, news people know news people, right? You can tell, and there's almost a secret coded language, and it was remarkable to see how quickly that sort of clicked, they've been really a great partner to us thus far, and pushed us creatively and journalistically, and said, look, we know and love what Vice News does, and we know and love this show and the work that Isobel and Ben and Seb and all of our correspondents have done for so many years. They said, we certainly want that, but we also want something that you haven't done before, and we want to see something different and new and better. So we've sort of had to evolve how we think about the show, and you asked before about story selection, and one of the things I think that Vice is incredibly good at is being able to find these stories, these areas, these hot spots before everybody else is sort of aware that they're even on the radar. And again, while we don't want to give away the stories we're going to be telling, we've already deployed on the ground in Latin America, in Africa, in the Mideast, into places that I don't think are on anybody else's radar yet. But I feel pretty confident are going to be in the headlines next year and the year afterwards. And going back to our coverage of ISIS or the alt-right here in America, I think having your sort of ear to the ground and truly being deployed a lot, being in region a lot, like Isobel, truly living your life in these stories, that leads to you hearing about things before other people do. And Showtime very much wanted that. They were very excited about that. And we're excited to evolve the show as well.
Yeah, is it going to be a vastly different show than the HBO incarnation?
In terms of format, it will be similar in the sense it'll be a half-hour show with two 15-minute segments. We may on occasion do a full half hour on certain things. I think in terms of the look and feel, you will notice that it has changed. For sure we wanted to evolve the look and feel. I think, we pioneered a type of journalism, the sort of through the fourth wall, authentic, our correspondents taking you along this journey as they travel in country and sort of bringing you along on this adventure, and you sort of don't know how it's going to end, and making that making the sort of getting there as part of the story, and that's, I think, has been to a degree now copied in a lot of places. So we felt sort of onus to say, well, how do we evolve? How do we bring something new to the table? And again, I think Isobel's reporting on the Uighurs and using some hidden cameras and some stuff we sort of hadn't done as much of before is a perfect example of that. As journalists and as creative storytellers, as filmmakers, we wanted to push the envelope too, and Showtime was incredibly supportive of that. They were like, yes, let's do something that hasn't been done before. Is the thinking to pair Vice with the circus? Because that seems like a very natural fit if you're going to be on Showtime. That would be a question for Showtime. I think because of the circus and the truly, excellent reporting they do, sort of on the inside the Beltway 2020, right. We'll probably steer a little bit away from sort of U.S. domestic politics in that sense of covering the race. I think when we think about politics, it is the human stories of policy decisions that have been made. It is the impact of elections overall and how that impacts people's lives. That's sort of more the way we would approach those stories, rather than sort of being embedded with a candidate, for instance, on the campaign trail. Sure. Still, it's hard to ignore the election, especially this year. Do you see yourself covering a little bit more domestic politics than Vice might ordinarily? Well, look, we have a lot of different shows and platforms that we report the news on, so we were certainly going to be covering lots of 2020, but again, I think for Vice on Showtime, the focus is a little bit more international, a little bit more in conflict zones and post-conflict zones, and again, a little bit of trying to take people to a place they've never been before, rather than taking them to Capitol Hill.
I also think it's important to remember that U.S. politics stretches beyond these borders, and whilst we're seeing the amount of foreign news coverage in this country is getting squeezed into smaller and smaller spaces, it's incredibly important for us to be reporting from different areas of the globe, because those impacts are so far-reaching, and I think that we can never claim ignorance to what's going on beyond our own borders. Yeah, that's an important point that comes up a lot with journalists these days, is how we get in such a tizzy over every Trump tweet, and that sucks up so much of the oxygen from all of the other heartbreaking things that are happening all over the world right now. Yeah, I think that, looking beyond the daily president's tweets is a real focus of ours. Yeah, and look, I think there's in my opinion, a bit of a fallacy of this thinking that U.S. audiences don't want international news and aren't interested in what happens outside their borders. Right. I think they are, if you tell those stories in the right way. And for us, we so often we lead with the humanity, and we are
when we're going to go cover stories, they obviously have broader geopolitical impact. They're talking about conflicts. They're talking about the effects of U.S. policy. But within those documentaries, you're going to find human, compelling stories to tell, and that's what people will then relate to, and that's how they can tie into it. And again, I think it's sort of like, it's the old saw of sort of a pollster trick, right? If you ask people, do you want international news? They're like, oh, no, not really. And you're like, do you want more in-depth, understanding of this issue? And they're like, oh yeah, of course I do, right? So it's sort of like, how do you, a little bit of how you ask the question. So, I think people are interested in those stories, and we're going to go find them and tell them.
And now I'm curious, you've been in this business for 20 years. Does this feel like, with the election and with impeachment, does this feel like a vastly different moment than anything that you've witnessed before?
Look, I ran the New York Post newsroom on 9/11. I've been through some big ones. This moment certainly feels unique. It certainly feels important. I think each and every era of the news feels different. I think this is a truly, I think the people's sort of fascination with and consumption of news, there's this very interesting dichotomy, right? That people are obsessed with the news right now in a way that is overwhelming, right? On our phones, every news alert, every tweet, we're constantly so plugged into everything that has happened, and it all feels so momentous at each moment, truly like the world could end the next day, or something truly horrific could happen at each moment. But at the same time, mistrust of news is at an all-time high. And that people say, you look at these studies, and 70-80% of what they see on social media they don't believe. So everybody's completely obsessed with the news, and at the same time saying, well, I don't believe any of it. It's this very strange sort of dynamic, and that's one of the things we look at a lot at Vice News, and what makes us different. If we've done lots of studies. We have enormous trust from our audience. Enormous. 90% of people under 35 who know Vice News trust it. That's a crazy statistic, and we take that trust very, very, very seriously. And part of that comes through in the authenticity of what we do. We're not always going to put a pretty bow on a story and say, well, we've got the answer here for you, coming up tonight at 11. We're going to say, look, these are really difficult, thorny issues, and maybe we don't have an easy answer for you, but we're going to take you deep. We're going to talk about it. We're going to explain it as best we know, and we're going to take you along on our journey as we learn about that story as well. And so I think that sort of approach leads to a trust that isn't the same kind of trust you have out there elsewhere. But look, 2020 is a momentous election for sure. The state of the world is fragile, and I think you have this bigger historical moment where you have. It's something I've talked about in our internal meetings with Showtime. It's sort of, you've had this moment of sort of the failure of Davos Man, of this moment that came 10 or 15 years ago. Well, if we all just get together and set up the right global systems of trade, and it's going to lift everybody's boats, and we were on the edge of this sort of shiny new post-partisan, post-conflict era where everything was gonna be fine, and that has obviously failed very fundamentally. And I think that's driving I see that as a through line for the rise of authoritarianism, of nationalism in lots of different places. I think there's sort of a bigger moment happening.
Yeah, and there's so much, as you mentioned, skepticism of the more established cable news networks and programs from both the right and the left these days. To me, it almost seems like some of the cynicism that we've rightly or wrongly labeled millennials with has become contagious and has started to pervade the entire culture. Do you think that it creates an opportunity for Vice News to expand its reach?
Yes. I mean, look, I think that mistrust, it is endemic to a lot of institutions right now. And when it comes to news, some of that has been state actors, intelligence services, certain politicians, purposefully creating mistrust in news, creating mistrust in facts, in basic journalism, and trying to sort of denigrate the work of lots of good journalists in lots of good places. But again, I think it is an opportunity for Vice News because people do see us as sort of outside the system to a degree. And again, because we do have this trust with our audience. And I think as more people see our products, listen to our products, watch our products, they understand that and see it. Izzy?
Yeah, I'd agree. And as we said before, I think, we call bullshit on millennials being, very self-centered and not really caring about things beyond their own little worlds. And I think that as long as you're telling stories that have human connections that people can relate to, then I do think there's a real opportunity to expand and broaden people's minds and understanding of the world.
And I think Vice actually coined the term immersive journalism, which boils down to sort of getting a closer, more authentic story compared to CNN or Fox News, where you can barely see anything because of all the graphics on the screen. Do you think that millennials want their news delivered in a raw or less produced package these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people who are engaging and who kind of contact me when they watch my films are getting younger and younger. It's millennials and it's Gen Zs, and they're reaching out and they're asking very engaging questions about our stuff. And people, the world is smaller than I think it's ever been before. People are very connected. People are interested and they want to know what's going on. And yeah, I mean, what drew me to Vice is that kind of immersive, raw, authentic style of journalism, where you feel like you can enter a place and be yourself and ask questions as I am talking to you right now, and listen to stories and try and convey that in the purest, truest, rawest sense.
And I think when it comes to that younger generation, when it comes to Gen Z, I mean, they all have grown up with a master's degree in media studies, right? I mean, they are highly fluent, deeply fluent in where stories come from, how they travel, how they're made, how they're created. These are people who grew up with literally editing tools at their fingertips in their phones. They know how to make movies, in a way that the previous generations didn't. So
and they know that they can take their phone and videotape a moment, and that has the potential to be on CNN the next day, which my generation never even dreamt that would be possible.
Right, and I think if the previous generations of millennials sort of had a bullshit detector. It's been said Gen Z has a bullshit flamethrower. Like it's not just that they detect it. If they think they are being lied to, if they think that they are being, that especially with any sort of, whether it's a news source or any institution around them, be that governments or schools or whatever it is, if they think that they are being spoken to inauthentically and someone's trying to put one over on them, they will call bullshit instantly and they will take it out on you very quickly. And I mean, how many brands have we seen that sort of tried to trot out a new a new campaign and just been scorched on social media for it? This generation will not tolerate falsehood and sort of speaking with a forked tongue. And that for us, I think, plays into sort of where we as Vice have always been. And look, we listen to what our audiences say. And again, we're a company that's in 25 countries, and in most of those countries, most of the people that work for the company are from there, and they are young, and we hear what's going on, and we hear how those communities are reacting to what's happening to international news, to how U.S. policy and so on. So we sort of have this internal, unfiltered system of hearing what's happening around the world that I think really informs how we view the world.
And before we go, I have to ask you about the other big change that's been happening at Vice. You've been in the process of shifting your cable network, Viceland, to a more news-focused model. In terms of content and audience, what kind of space do you see Viceland filling within the realm of cable news?
I think, Vice, our cable network, I think there is, as we discussed, there is a desire for news and documentary that is authentic and that is honest and that is told in a different way. I think there is so much distrust of the system overall, and to be a voice that always speaks honestly, that always speaks authentically, that is different. And I think there is a lane for us there to succeed. And when we do research, what we hear from people is that they actually want more information. They want us to go deeper. They want to understand things in a deeper way, and they don't just want a soundbite. And that's, again, something we've always excelled at. And when I think about our journalism, we're not driven by the 24-hour news cycle. We cover stories because we think they're interesting and because we think they're important. we are never going to have a split screen of 4 talking heads of 4 7-year-old white dudes yelling about Trump. Like, that's just not going to be what you're going to see on our cable channel. So stay tuned. There's going to be a lot of interesting stuff coming down the pike.
Cool. Well, again, folks can look for the new season of Vice premiering on Showtime, I believe, this spring. Jesse Angelo and Isobel Yeung, thanks for talking with me.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks again to Jesse Angelo and Isobel Yeung for coming on the podcast. The new season of Vice premieres this Sunday, March 29th at 8 p.m. Eastern and Pacific on Showtime. For more information, visit Vice.com and follow Isobel and Jesse on Twitter at Isobel Yeung and at Jesse M. Angelo. Times are tight right now, so what would you do if your computer broke and wasn't covered by warranty, or you suddenly needed electrical work on your house? Do you have enough saved up to take care of sudden emergency expenses like those? American Home Shield, America's most preferred home warranty, gives you a plan when stuff breaks down in your home, stuff insurance doesn't cover, and stuff you don't want to mess with or go broke trying to get fixed. Go to ahs.com/kick today to save $50 and start protecting your home and budget from inevitable breakdowns. That's ahs.com/kick for $50 off any plan. American Home Shield. Be sure with Shield. Limitations and exclusions apply. See plan for details. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and rate and review us while you're there. 5-star ratings and detailed reviews are one of the best ways for new listeners to discover the show. You can also follow us on Facebook or on Twitter at @KickassNewsPod and recommend us to your friends on your social media. For more fun stuff, visit kickassnews.com, and I welcome your comments, questions, and suggestions at comments@kickassnews.com. For now, I'm Ben Mathis, and thanks for listening to Kick-Ass News.